The night was heavy with rain. Burkina Faso's capital lay under a curtain of storm clouds, the streets glistening like black glass. Neon signs flickered, gutters overflowed, and thunder cracked like a warning from the heavens. Through this labyrinth of darkness moved a single figure, Ibrahim Traoré. His red beret was soaked, his uniform darkened with rain, but his stride was steady, deliberate. He was not here as a head of state. He was not here to give speeches, nor to lead parades. Tonight he was a man searching for something, or someone. The storm led him to the edge of the city, to a forgotten industrial district where rust ate away at corrugated rooftops and silence hung heavy, broken only by the occasional groan of shifting metal. Then, at the end of a narrow alley, Traoré saw it, a garage with its sign long gone, its paint stripped, its doors half broken, leaning under years of neglect. Yet from within, a dim yellow glow seeped out into the rain-soaked night. He stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of oil, rust, and dust. Shadows clung to every corner, machines slept like dying beasts, and chains dangled from the ceiling like forgotten nooses. And there, crouched beneath the hood of a broken-down car, was a man. His hands were blackened with grease, his face aged by hardship, his back bent under invisible weight. He looked up, and in that single instant, Traoré felt time collapse. It was him, his childhood friend. The boy who once ran barefoot through the fields with him, who shared stolen mangoes, who dreamt of a future where they would change the world together. Now reduced to a mechanic hidden in the ruins of a garage, swallowed by poverty and shadows. But there was something more. On the table behind the man lay not just tools, but papers, maps, coded notes, fragments of ledgers burned at the edges. Secrets that were not meant to survive, secrets someone wanted buried. The storm raged louder outside, as if the heavens themselves were bearing witness. And in that moment, Ibrahim Traoré realized that what lay inside this garage was not just his friend's lost life, but a mystery that could tear apart everything he thought he knew. What he did next would amaze the world. The story of Ibrahim Traoré was already one of fire and upheaval. He had risen from the barracks, carrying not just a rifle, but the unbroken will of his people. Yet power, as he knew too well, was never secure. Enemies lurked not just in foreign capitals, but in back rooms, in handshakes laced with betrayal, in promises whispered only to be broken. And yet here, inside this forgotten garage, the weight of betrayal felt different, more personal, more cutting. Traoré had not seen his childhood friend in decades. Life had scattered them like dry leaves in the wind. One became a soldier, hardened by discipline, pushed by fate into a seat of power. The other became invisible, swallowed by the city, reduced to mending the broken engines of men who would never know his name. But why here? Why now? Traoré stepped deeper into the garage. The sound of his boots echoed across the concrete floor, a steady reminder of authority. Yet inside he felt no triumph. He felt the sharp sting of guilt. The mechanic, his friend, said nothing, at first. His eyes carried the weight of years, and within them flickered a strange, unreadable sorrow. But as Traoré's gaze drifted to the workbench, to the scattered papers and scorched maps, the silence thickened. These were not the possessions of a mere mechanic. These were fragments of something larger, evidence of movements, transactions, names half erased in ash. A trail of secrets, and secrets Traoré knew could kill. The rain outside intensified, hammering against the rusted roof as if urging the truth to break free. Traoré's mind reeled back through the years, to dusty roads of his youth, to laughter shared under starlight, to promises whispered by boys who believed the world could bend to their will. His friend had been there, always at his side. Fearless, loyal, inseparable. But here, in this garage, he was someone else. Or perhaps he had always been. The mystery grew heavier with each passing second. Why would a man who once dreamed of freedom hide away with documents that could expose betrayals greater than any seen before? Who was hunting him? And why, of all people, did fate lead Ibrahim Traoré here tonight under the cloak of storm and shadow? The garage itself seemed alive with secrets. Every corner hummed with unease. A half-finished engine whined as if protesting silence. A cracked window shuddered against the wind, spilling brief flashes of lightning across the friend's tired face. For a heartbeat, Traoré wondered, was this reunion a blessing or a trap? The thought clawed at him. He could not show weakness. As a leader, every gesture, every silence, every flicker of doubt could ripple outward. But inside this garage, stripped of ceremony, he was no longer the commander, the president, the icon. He was simply Ibrahim, a man standing before the ghost of his own past. The friend finally moved, setting down his wrench with deliberate care. The clink echoed like a gunshot. His voice, when it finally came, was low, coarse, worn by years of silence. He did not greet Traoré with joy, nor resentment, only with the heavy, unspoken truth of a man who had seen too much, and though no words revealed it yet, Ibrahim felt the tremor of something larger, something hidden. The rain poured on. The storm pressed closer. The garage seemed to shrink under. The weight of time. And as Ibrahim Traoré stood there, staring into the face of his long-lost friend, he realized this meeting was not chance. It was the beginning of something far greater, a mystery that would drag him into shadows far darker than the battlefield, and choices that would test the very core of who he was. The world outside still thought of him as a soldier, a leader, a revolutionary. But inside this garage, Ibrahim Traoré was about to become something else entirely, a seeker of truth. And the truth was waiting, buried in grease-stained papers, scorched maps, and the haunted eyes of a friend who might just be the key to everything. The storm did not ease that night. It pressed against the city as if the skies themselves wanted to drown the earth, washing away the illusions of order and power. For Ibrahim Traoré, the sound of the rain was no longer just weather. It was a rhythm of warning, a pulse that followed him even as he left the garage. The papers he had glimpsed on the workbench would not leave his mind. They were not simply maps and ledgers. They were fragments of a deeper puzzle. Even the smudged ink, the half-burnt corners, and the coded symbols suggested danger. Secrets that someone had tried, and failed, to destroy. He did not speak of it that night. Instead, he carried the weight in silence. The face of his long-lost friend burned into his thoughts, along with the sorrow that lived in those weary eyes. Days bled into nights, but the discovery would not release him. Each time he tried to focus on his duties as head of state, each military briefing, each economic report, each parade, he found himself dragged back to that darkened garage, back to the smell of grease and oil, back to the knowledge that something had been waiting for him there, something that had survived in shadows, hidden even from his watchful eyes. The memory of his friend was not simple. It pulled him back to a time before power, before guns, before the weight of a nation pressed onto his shoulders. They had grown up together in the same dust and hunger. As boys, they had dreamed of the future, of carving their names into history, of defying those who exploited their people. But while Ibrahim had marched into the military, sharpening discipline into a weapon, his friend had vanished into the city, swallowed by poverty. Now, fate had brought them together again. But there was no laughter in their reunion, only silence, only the sense that something unspeakable had happened in the years between. It was not long before whispers began to circulate. Whispers of accidents in the industrial quarter, of strangers, seen near the garage at odd hours, of foreign men asking questions in markets and taverns. Traoré was not a man who trusted coincidence. He ordered quiet surveillance, unseen by the public eye. What returned to him was confirmation. His friend was not just a mechanic. He was being watched, hunted. The question that haunted him was why. One night, compelled by an instinct he could not ignore, Traoré returned to the garage without guards, slipping once more into the shadowed world where his friend lived. The man was there, hunched over an old journal, its pages scarred by fire. His hands trembled as he turned the fragile sheets, and though the words were faded, the urgency was unmistakable. When he looked up at Traoré, his expression carried the same burdened sorrow as before, but this time there was also fear. The journal was not a diary. It was evidence. In it were fragments of transactions, routes, shipments, names of companies that did not exist, initials that pointed to men in suits who lived continents away. And among those notes was a truth Traoré did not want to see but could no longer deny. His people's wealth, their lifeblood, was being siphoned away in silence. Gold, resources, contracts, all smuggled through hidden agreements, buried in the bureaucracy of foreign power. And somehow his friend had stumbled onto it all. The weight of that discovery pressed on him like a vice. This was not just theft. This was betrayal, dressed as diplomacy. A web spun by hands invisible to the common people, yet felt in every empty stomach and every weary face in the markets. But there was more. Hidden between the lines were hints of something darker. Notes of meetings with men who were not officials, but mercenaries. References to disappearances. And there, in the margins, a phrase scrawled in haste. "They will kill me before the truth leaves this place." It was not paranoia. Within a week, shadowy figures made their presence known. Unmarked cars loitered near the garage. Strangers asked about the mechanic in voices that carried foreign accents. Once, a group of men entered the district at night and never came out. Again, bodies later found miles away, mutilated beyond recognition. The danger was no longer distant. It pressed against the walls of the garage. It followed Traoré in the shadows, and it whispered through the corridors of power. Even within his own ranks, he began to feel the sting of doubt. Not every soldier was loyal. Not every officer wanted him to succeed. And the deeper he stared into the fragments of his friend's journal, the clearer it became that the conspiracy reached into his own circle. Famine gnawed at the edges of his nation. Mothers wept as their children faded into silence, while markets grew empty and soldiers grew restless. Hunger became the sharpest weapon of all, and somewhere beyond the borders, powerful men were tightening the noose, waiting for him to stumble. Each night he asked himself the same question. Was his friend a survivor of this web, or a part of it? The bond of childhood pulled him toward trust, toward the loyalty of shared memories. But the cold reality of leadership whispered otherwise. What if the man in the garage was bait, a lure set by those who wished to break him? What if, beneath the sorrow, his old friend carried betrayal? The city seemed to close in around him. Streets that once felt familiar now bristled with danger. Whispers turned into silences when he entered a room. Even within his headquarters, he saw eyes that refused to meet his own. And then came the first attack. It happened at night, sudden and violent. Armed men stormed the garage, their weapons gleaming in flashes of lightning. The walls shook with gunfire, the air split by screams and the metallic crash of falling chains. Ibrahim arrived too late to prevent the ambush, but not too late to see his friend fighting desperately against men who moved with military precision. He was not a soldier, not anymore, but he fought like a man who had nothing left to lose. When the last echo of violence faded, the garage was scarred, its roof torn open, its machines riddled with bullets. And in the wreckage, his friend clutched the journal to his chest, refusing to let it go even as blood dripped from his hands. The truth was clear. If strangers were willing to kill for this, then the secrets inside that journal carried power greater than any bullet. For Ibrahim Traoré, the question was no longer whether to trust his friend. The question was how far he was willing to go to uncover the truth buried in those pages, and whether the cost of that truth would consume them both. The rain returned the next night, heavier than before, as if the heavens themselves were preparing for what was coming. The storm was no longer a backdrop, it was a warning. And in its roar, Ibrahim felt the weight of destiny pressing closer. What began as a chance reunion in a forgotten garage was no longer a story of friendship. It had become something far greater. It had become a war in the shadows. The city did not sleep after the attack. Even when the bullets stopped echoing, the silence that followed felt heavier than the storm itself. Word traveled through the streets in whispers. An old garage burned, armed men prowling, bodies vanishing into the night. Few dared to speak openly, but everyone felt it. Something larger was stirring. For Ibrahim Traoré, the truth pressed harder with each sunrise. The journal was no longer just scraps of paper. It was a weapon. And like every weapon, it carried both salvation and destruction. His long-lost friend, once just a mechanic in the shadows, was now a man bound to the secret. History of betrayal that threatened to strangle their nation. Each page revealed more than the last. Routes carved into the desert, shipments of gold and minerals rerouted under false names, payments to faceless corporations that existed only on paper. And between those numbers and codes were darker hints, entries about soldiers who had defected, weapons that had slipped through borders, and men who had offered loyalty but carried foreign gold in their pockets. The betrayal was not outside, it was inside, and Ibrahim could feel its teeth closing in. The mercenaries did not stop after the first attack. Their presence spread like smoke through the city. Shadows lingered near checkpoints. Strange accidents struck men close to Traoré. One poisoned, another found in a ditch at the edge of the forest. No fingerprints, no names, only silence. Even within his own council, he began to see hesitation, eyes shifting, conversations that ended abruptly when he entered. The journal had warned of this. Written in broken sentences, his friend had recorded whispers of 3 men, generals, not foreign agents, but men inside the system who had grown rich feeding off secret deals. They had used the chaos to mask their theft, funneling wealth out of the country while the people starved. His friend had stumbled across their web and paid the price, hunted down, forced into exile within his own homeland, surviving only by burying himself in grease and shadows. And now the generals knew he had spoken to Traoré. The weight of hunger pressed on the people. Markets were barren. Mothers begged for grain. Soldiers doubted whether the sacrifices they made meant anything at all. Each day the conspiracy strangled Burkina Faso tighter, its invisible hand forcing Ibrahim to make choices no leader should face. The IMF's sanctions carved wounds from afar, while rebels and mercenaries carved them from within. It was no longer a question of survival. It was a question of time. The garage became their war room, not a palace, not a headquarters, but a ruined sanctuary where oil-stained engines stood like witnesses to history. In the shadows of those broken machines, Ibrahim and his old friend pieced together the fragments. Each line of code, each burned note, each name scrawled in haste, brought them closer to a truth so dangerous that it seemed to poison the air itself. 1. Night, lightning split the sky as they uncovered the final detail. A date, circled in red, marked in desperate handwriting. A meeting, 93 minutes. A place where the 3 generals would gather to divide their spoils and cement their grip. It was not written where, not exactly, but the clues were there. Hidden routes across the desert, a warehouse tied to shipments, coordinates scattered through the margins of ledgers. It took hours, days, and sleepless nights to piece it together. And when they did, The truth sent a chill through Traoré's veins. It would not just be a meeting, it would be a test. The generals were preparing to decide his fate, whether to let him remain as a puppet, or whether to erase him from the game entirely. The days leading to that night stretched like years. Every step through the city felt watched, every word tasted of suspicion. His soldiers grew restless, divided by loyalty and fear. The people begged for bread, for hope, for answers, while the machinery of betrayal spun unseen above their heads, and then came the night. The garage was quiet when Ibrahim arrived. His friend stood ready, the journal clutched like scripture, eyes hollowed by exhaustion. They both knew what waited. It was not a battle of armies, not a war of nations, but a confrontation carved into the marrow of destiny. 93 minutes. The say. Storm returned as they moved. Rain hammered the streets. Thunder rolled like drums of war, and the air was thick with the weight of decision. They reached the warehouse at the edge of the city, where shadows moved with discipline, rifles glinting under flashes of lightning. The generals were inside, cloaked in arrogance, certain that their power was unshakable, but they had not counted on this. The first shot broke the night, then another. The warehouse erupted into chaos, mercenaries firing from the shadows, soldiers screaming, engines roaring to life as machines of war were turned into barricades. Traoré moved through it like a phantom, every step deliberate, every glance sharpened by the weight of history. His friend fought beside him, not as a soldier, but as a man determined to finish the truth he had carried for so long. The confrontation stretched into eternity. Minutes felt like hours. 93 minutes of fire, blood, and shadow. Ibrahim stood face to face with betrayal itself, the three generals cloaked in fear and fury. They offered deals, whispered lies, promised wealth, survival, comfort, everything he could want, if only he abandoned the truth. But he did not bend. The rain turned the floor to mud, the roof cracked under the weight of fire, and the air was suffocated by smoke. In the chaos, choices became weapons. To fight meant to risk everything, but to yield meant to lose not just his life, but the soul of his nation. And so, in those 93 minutes, Ibrahim Traoré made his choice. When the smoke cleared, the white generals no longer held their power. The garage's secrets were no longer whispers in the dark. And in his hand, Ibrahim carried not just a journal, but the future. The world would never look at him the same way again. The warehouse stood like a carcass at the city's edge, its corrugated iron walls trembling under the storm's howl. Rain hammered against its roof in a relentless rhythm, water streaming down in crooked veins, hissing against the heat of lamps burning inside. To the outside world, it was just another forgotten ruin. But within its walls sat the heart of betrayal, the convergence of greed and power. The 93 minutes began with silence. Ibrahim Traoré entered the shadows, his uniform drenched, the red beret clinging to his head like a crown in the storm. His friend followed, a man of grease and scars, clutching the journal as though it were his last breath. Inside, the air reeked of oil, of cigarettes, of ambition. Generals stood around a table layered with maps and briefcases of money, their voices hushed, their laughter laced with venom. They had no idea he was already there. The storm outside masked his footsteps, the darkness cloaked his presence. For a moment, he simply watched. Three men, once his comrades, now his enemies. They were the kind of men who shook his hand in daylight, but sharpened knives in the dark, and tonight they plotted to carve not only his fate, but the fate of millions. The first minute stretched forever. Traoré's chest rose and fell with deliberate control, his mind weighing every possibility. He could reveal himself, demand allegiance, expose them as traitors. But power, he knew, never surrendered to words. It had to be broken. By the 5th minute, his friend's breath grew shaky. The journal trembled in his hands, the inked codes, and names whispering their truth even in silence. Every second inside this den of betrayal was borrowed time. The storm outside roared louder, a drumbeat of inevitability. At the 9th minute, one of the generals sensed something, eyes narrowing, head turning. A soldier shifted in the shadows, boots scraping against concrete. Ibrahim realized the moment of stealth was gone. The silence shattered, gunfire split the air. The warehouse erupted in chaos. Bullets tore through crates, sparks rained as metal screamed, and shadows lunged against shadows. Traoré moved with a soldier's precision, his every step calculated, his every motion born of years in battle. He was not just fighting for himself, he was fighting for the truth, for his people, for the weight of history pressing down upon his shoulders. By the 20th minute, the warehouse was a battlefield. Mercenaries poured in, their eyes cold, their movements mechanical. Engines roared to life as vehicles were turned into barricades. Smoke crawled across the floor, thick and choking, turning every corner into a phantom's lair. His friend stayed close, clutching the journal, ducking behind rusted machines, his courage tested against a war he was never meant to fight. But he did not run. He knew that without him, without the evidence he carried, the night would be lost. By the 30th minute, the storm broke the roof itself. Rain cascaded inside, drenching fire and blood alike, turning the floor into slick mud. Lightning flared, illuminating faces twisted in rage, fear, desperation. Each flash revealed the generals, standing behind their mercenaries, barking orders, promising gold for Ibrahim's head. The 35th minute nearly broke him. A bullet grazed his shoulder, the sting hot and searing. He staggered, but his will anchored him. Pain was nothing. Fear was nothing. What mattered was survival. His friends, and the truth. By the 50th minute, the fight turned primal. No longer calculated gunfire, no longer tactical maneuvers. It became survival in its rawest form. Chains swung from the ceiling, used as weapons. Broken tools became blades. Engines burst into flame, casting monstrous shadows across the warehouse walls. The rain and fire merged into chaos, and within that chaos, Ibrahim's resolve only hardened. The 60th minute was the turning point. He cornered one of the generals, dragging him into the light. The man spat lies, begged with promises of wealth, of power, of a future free of struggle. But Ibrahim saw only fear in his eyes, fear of exposure, fear of the truth tearing apart his empire. The general tried to strike, but in that moment, Ibrahim ended his reign with merciless precision. The battle surged on. By the 75th minute, only 2 generals remained, their mercenaries falling one by one, their arrogance peeling away under the weight of inevitability. Ibrahim's uniform was torn, blood mixed with rain on his face, his breath heavy but unbroken. His friend was still alive, though bruised and battered, the journal never leaving his grip. Every second now felt stretched thin, the world holding its breath. At the 85th minute, the second general fell. A man who once swore loyalty, now lying broken among the wreckage of greed. The last general, cornered and desperate, raged like a caged beast. He fired wildly, screamed curses, his voice cracking under the weight of his crumbling power. And then came the 93rd minute, the bye. Storm outside fell silent for just a heartbeat, as though the heavens themselves waited. Ibrahim stood before the last general, the embodiment of betrayal. The man spat words of venom, words meant to pierce, to tempt, to corrupt. But Ibrahim did not waver. His red beret clung to his head, soaked in blood and rain, a symbol of defiance. With a final, decisive act, the battle ended. The warehouse groaned, flames licking its bones, rain pouring through shattered steel. The general's empire of shadows collapsed in that instant, their greed buried beneath the storm, and Ibrahim Traoré stepped out of the fire alive. His friend staggered beside him, the journal clutched tight. Behind them, the warehouse smoldered, its secrets no longer hidden in darkness. The 93 minutes had ended, but their echoes would shake the world. The fire did not die quickly. For hours the warehouse burned like a beacon, the storm feeding its rage rather than extinguishing it. Smoke curled into the heavens, thick and black, as though the very earth was purging itself of poison. The city awoke to whispers carried on the wind, gunfire in the night, thunder that sounded more like war than weather, and flames at the edge of the capital where nothing should have burned. By dawn, only the skeleton of the warehouse remained. Twisted steel bent under its own weight, charred beams jutted out like broken ribs, and the floor smoldered with the ashes of greed. Among those ashes lay the final remnants of the 3 generals who had once believed themselves untouchable. Their empire of shadows had collapsed in a single night, buried beneath 93 minutes of defiance. Ibrahim Traoré stood at the edge of the wreckage, his uniform torn, his shoulder seared with pain, his red beret stained by smoke and blood. Beside him, his long-lost friend leaned heavily on the journal, every page within it now priceless, every line of ink a weapon stronger than bullets. The man was exhausted, worn to the bone, but alive. For years, he had been nothing more than a forgotten mechanic, a ghost among the ruins of a city that had abandoned him. But today, he was the guardian of truth. Word spread faster than fire. Within hours, the people knew. They knew of the general's betrayal, of the wealth stolen from their mouths, of the conspiracy that had strangled them in silence. The journal was proof, its fragments carried into the light for the first time, and with that proof came fury. Across the city, men and women rose. Hunger had kept them silent, fear had kept them bowed, but betrayal lit a fire in their hearts that no famine could extinguish. Crowds gathered, voices thundered, fists rose into the air. They did not cry out in despair this time. They cried out for justice, for dignity, for freedom. The ripple spread beyond the borders. News of the warehouse reached distant lands within days. Leaders whispered in panic, corporations scrambled to hide their tracks. Foreign envoys spoke with trembling voices. They had always believed Africa's silence was unbreakable, its chains too thick to shatter. But now, one man, one night, one act had torn the veil away. For Ibrahim, the victory was not sweet. It was heavy, soaked in blood and sacrifice. The image of his fallen soldiers haunted him. The memory of the storm's violence still burned in his chest. But as he stood before his people, watching them rise with fire in their eyes, he knew that the cost had not been in vain. His friend stood beside him when the truth was spoken aloud for the first time. The mechanic, once invisible, was now a symbol in his own right, a man who had carried the burden of secrets no one else dared to touch. He had been broken by poverty, exiled by fear, but in the end, he had been the key to unraveling the chains of betrayal. Together, they addressed the people, not with speeches of triumph, but with words carved from pain and survival. They spoke of the truth hidden in ledgers and ashes. They spoke of the wealth that belonged not to the few but to the many. They spoke of the need to rebuild, to rise, to reclaim what had been stolen. And the people listened. Weeks turned to months, and the journal became more than evidence. It became a torch. Nations across Africa, long divided, began to take notice. Leaders who once remained silent now faced questions they could not escape. The IMF's grip weakened, its demands losing power against the tide of resistance. A spirit, spread like wildfire, ignited by the sight of a young man in a red beret walking out of a burning warehouse, holding truth in his hands. But beyond politics, beyond economy, something deeper changed. The people began to believe again. In the markets, Where hunger once gnawed, voices sang. In villages where silence once lingered, drums beat with renewed rhythm. Children who once stared at empty bowls now ran barefoot with laughter, carrying the echo of hope. The garage, too, did not remain forgotten. Its ruins became a place of pilgrimage. Not because of engines or oil, but because of what it represented. A place where truth was hidden, preserved, and finally unleashed. For those who visited, the rusted chains and broken machines were not relics of despair, but reminders that even in the darkest corners, light could be born. For Ibrahim Traoré, the journey did not end with the warehouse. It had only begun. He was no longer just a soldier, nor just a leader. He was a symbol. To some, he was a threat. To others, a savior. But to the people who had walked through hunger and betrayal, he was hope carved into flesh and bone. And yet he never forgot the friend he had found in the garage. A man reduced to nothing, who had carried everything. They did not speak often of the past, of their childhood, of the years lost. They did not need to. Their silence was enough, a bond unbroken, tested in fire and storm, sealed in the ashes of betrayal. One evening, as the sun set over Ouagadougou, painting the sky in crimson and gold, Ibrahim stood on a balcony overlooking the city. The air was alive with the sound of drums, the scent of food cooking, the laughter of children echoing through the streets. His friend stood behind him, quiet, leaning against the rail, watching the same horizon. And in that moment, Ibrahim wondered, not about power, nor about politics, nor about the conspiracies that still lurked beyond the borders. He wondered about destiny. Perhaps history was not written in palaces or in boardrooms. Perhaps it was written in places like a ruined garage, in the hands of forgotten men, in the choices made when no one was watching. He thought of the night. The storm led him to the garage. The moment he saw his friend beneath the hood of a broken car, the flash of recognition, the weight of mystery. He thought of the journal, of the generals, of the 93 minutes that would never be forgotten. And then he thought of Africa, not as a continent of wounds, but as a land rising from its chains. The drums grew louder. The sky deepened into night. Ibrahim placed his hand on the rail and let the thought settle into words not spoken aloud, but carried by the wind. Is this the moment Africa broke its chains? The world did not answer, but the people did.